And Arizona's military installations have ratcheted up security after today's terrorist assaults in New York and Washington. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base here in Tucson, plus the Army post at Fort Huachuca outside Sierra Vista, and the Marine Corps Air Station in Yuma have all been placed on highest security alert level, Condition Delta. Luke Air Force Base spokesman in Glendale says they've also increased security levels. A spokesman there declined to elaborate. Some local items to tell you about. Tonight at 8 o'clock, there will be two different prayer services we'll tell you about. In the meantime, St. Augustine Cathedral in downtown Tucson has scheduled a Mass at 12 noon today for the victims of these tragedies in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. Bishop Manuel Moreno will celebrate that Mass. There will be a candlelight vigil on the University of Arizona campus at the Newman Center, corner of 2nd and Cherry. Newman Center's spokesman said that all are welcome to join the university community in prayer. That'll be this evening at 8 o'clock. There's also an announcement of a joint interfaith prayer service at St. Francis in the Foothills at the corner of Swan and... Exactly, but anyway, over on Swan Street, St. Francis in the Foothills. We'll try to pass along more information as we receive that here at the KUAT-FM studios. Right now, we return to BBC World News Service in London.
Also express our solidarity with the United States and with the American people, and we'll see what the coordination tomorrow will decide for the new or additional measures to strengthen the fight against terrorism.
Bernard Valereau, spokesman for the French Foreign Ministry. Thank you very much for joining us from Paris, from France. They're expressing horror and indignation, sentiments being expressed around the world after what's been a devastating today, an unprecedented terrorism act committed in the United States. You've been listening to a BBC World Service news special. I'm Lise Doucette. Let's get now the latest news on the events so far. A news roundup with Marion Marshall.
There's been catastrophic loss of life and destruction in the United States after 3 apparently hijacked passenger aircraft flew into the World Trade Center in New York and into the Pentagon in Washington. The World Trade Center towers and part of the Pentagon collapsed after the attacks, which took place during the morning rush hour, when thousands of office workers would have been going to work. There are no indications so far as to who's behind the attacks. The mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, declared that a tremendous number of people had been killed. National Guard units have been evacuating the whole of the lower part of Manhattan Island. United Nations headquarters in New York was also evacuated, forcing the abrupt cancellation of a session of the Security Council. In Washington, the White House was evacuated by Secret Service officers, openly carrying automatic weapons. Congress and government buildings were also evacuated, which caused traffic gridlock. President Bush said those responsible for what he called these cowardly acts would be hunted down and punished. And speculation about who carried out the attacks began. In some Palestinian camps, there were expressions of support for the Saudi militant Osama bin Laden, but a spokesman for the Taliban authorities in Afghanistan, where he's believed to have taken refuge, said he didn't have the capability for such a huge operation. The Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat said he was completely shocked and sent his condolences to the American people. In numerous countries, emergency government meetings were called as shock over the attacks spread. President Putin in Moscow condemned the inhuman action, and the British Prime Minister Tony Blair called for democratic nations to unite to eradicate such mass terrorism. All American stock markets closed for the day. The value of the dollar plunged, along with share prices in Europe, and the London stock market tumbled by 5%. Oil prices soared over fears that the attacks could create havoc in the oil fields of the Middle East. And that's the summary.
You're listening to a BBC World Service news special on a day of unprecedented terrorism in the United States, which has caused shock and indignation around the world. I'm Lise Doucette. Let's just recap on today's developments. 2 airliners deliberately crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York during the morning rush hour, causing both buildings to collapse. An estimated 50,000 people work in what is the city's most distinctive landmark. A 3rd plane then crashed into the Pentagon Defense Headquarters in Washington, and not long after, a fourth crashed near Pittsburgh. President George W. Bush has warned that those responsible will be hunted down and punished. And around the world, governments are calling for emergency security meetings. World leaders, including Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair, have sent messages of condolence to the victims, their families, and to the people of the United States. There have been condemnation elsewhere. Pakistan's President General Pervez Musharraf condemned the attacks and called for world unity in the fight against terrorism.
The people and the government of Pakistan deeply mourn the enormous and unprecedented loss of innocent lives in the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. We share the grief of the American people in this grave national tragedy. We strongly condemn this most brutal and horrible act of terror and violence. This world must unite to fight against terrorism in all its forms and root out this modern-day evil.
Pakistan's President General Pervez Musharraf has also been a statement from the Taliban leaders of Afghanistan. Our Afghanistan correspondent, Kate Clark, now joins us. Kate, what exactly did the Taliban say?
Well, they called emergency press conferences in Kabul and Islamabad, the capital of neighbouring Pakistan. They wanted to tell the American people that Afghanistan shared their pain, and they hoped that the terrorists would be caught and brought to justice and to trial.
And they also denied that Osama bin Laden, the Saudi millionaire, the dissident, was not responsible?
That's right. In response to questionings, they said that Osama bin Laden could not have carried out the attacks because he's without contact with the outside world. This is a line they continue to make, even though the Americans and others have questioned it. They also answered questions about a possible American attack. Everyone here is very well aware that 3 years ago, when the 2 American embassies in Africa were bombed, America blamed Osama bin Laden, and they launched cruise missiles against training camps belonging to him in eastern Afghanistan.
And so this calling of the news conference underlined their apprehension that this could happen again.
I'm sure they wanted to try and preempt any question by the Americans that Osama bin Laden or the Taliban could have been behind this. The Taliban ambassador said he wasn't worried. He said that he thought America would launch a full investigation and present the evidence before the world before they made any move.
And what's been the reaction on the streets of either Kabul or Islamabad?
Well, there's been very little reaction yet. The Afghans that I have spoken to have been shocked by the news. There's not that much hostility towards America traditionally in Afghanistan, the sort of hostility that you find in some parts of the Middle East, for example. And I think most Afghans will feel the human tragedy of these events rather than take any sort of political calculations.
Kate Clark, thank you very much for joining us, our Afghanistan correspondent. So a devastating day, particularly in the United States, and perhaps the greatest impact at all was, of course, this was the financial center in the heart of New York in Lower Manhattan. Our business reporter Mark Ashurst joins us here. Mark, just tell us again, what's the importance of the World Trade Center when it comes to the financial network of the United States?
Well, in many respects it is the hub of global capitalism. It's a very important strategic location for in America's financial architecture. 40 to 50,000 people work there. The largest tenant in the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center was Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, the investment bank. Lehman Brothers also there, as are American Express. 150 to 200,000 people pass through that building daily. US markets closed today, clearly, but the repercussions were felt across Europe, where markets plummeted. London's FTSE 100 was down 5.7% at 47.46. Frankfurt closed 8.5% lower. Paris was down 7.4%. And this on a day before those explosions, when the markets were beginning to head upwards. The Nikkei was up 1% at the beginning of the day. So a huge shock to the system, which raises the spectre of terrorist activity for the very first time, really being able to disrupt the entire financial architecture, the entire system.
So a whole network has then, in effect, crashed. What's going to be the impact, let's say, in the short and medium term?
Well, the repercussions already felt today with investors looking for a safe haven. Gold, which has been in decline for many years, went up. The gold price rose. That's traditionally a secure home for money in times of panic. Bonds went up. There was demand for investors seeking to buy government debt instead of stock markets because of the problems that the corporate sector will